And so because the market's changing, I have to be a step ahead of that market change. And I think what libraries can really do is have those strategic conversations about where do we think the market's going to go, and how can we get people to upskill to make sure that you're always ahead of the change in the market rather than running after the technology.
To Mutale, I'll just kick off and welcome you back to Toronto, because you've also spoken previously at the library. Maybe some of our audience members were also a part of that, but do you mind if I just go there for a second in terms of a throwback? What brought you here the first time?
So it was 2019 BC, so before COVID.
All right.
And I was here in a discussion about sidewalk labs. And what really interested me at the time, specifically coming from the US, was the ways in which the Toronto community really were behind this idea that they already had a smart city, that they didn't need sensors, and they didn't need really what was mass surveillance to make living here better. And I remember coming for that conversation and then being asked for another conversation which looks similar to this. And I think as somebody that was looking at policy at the time, but somebody who was also really interested in the systems, it felt like a hug to think that there was this group of people that were in this major city that were really holding on to the issues, but also that the library was creating the space for the convening and the space for the discomfort and the space for both the companies and people to come together. So it was really nice.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because sometimes that prefix, smart, it does remind me of the meme. You know, you keep on using that word. I do not think you know what it means, because at the end of the day at home, I'm like, it's a toaster, or like, it's a dryer. Like, what are we doing here? What's happening? So that arc is also great to reflect on. AI for the people and AI in Canada, we're in a fascinating moment.
Right.
We have been having regulatory conversations, sort of dancing around them for the better part of a decade. And in the meantime, surprise, surprise, the technology has not waited for us. We have a new minister of artificial intelligence. We don't quite have...
Is he a real person?
He is a real person. I have physically seen him.
Okay.
No, but I'm glad you asked, because what was the jurisdiction that had an AI minister and was sort of putting forward as a novelty, what if we sort of had an algorithmic system who could, you know, vote or make certain decisions? Yeah, seriously. I would Google that, but I'm just using a book, which is like a particular form of technology. We are anticipating new privacy legislation in Canada, which of course is part and parcel of our AI conversation. That could be quite soon. I love like a pre-holiday drop. Let us all kind of freak out, digest, and you know, the House rises and then they sort of give us a draft of legislation, something to look forward to in the new year. And there are about 6 different parliamentary committees. I was just in Ottawa earlier this week speaking at one of them, studying the challenges related to AI. So it does feel like we're at times dancing around what we're trying to think about. And I wondered if, just to lay the scene a little bit, you could help us, like, what are we talking about when we anchor in thinking about algorithmic systems? Because for Canada, we're trying to regulate the composition, like the construction, and the application of a technology at the same time. And when you look at other tech regulations, we rarely do that in one kind of piece or sort of one shot. So what is it we're even talking about here?
Great question. So I think it's 2 things. One thing is, I don't want to be too abstract, and so I'm going to speak in analogies and stories and case studies. And from my vantage point, I think what we're trying to do is to figure out how a new technology that can improve in some ways efficiencies can be integrated into our wider systems. And I often think about the ways in which, when we look at the British Industrial Revolution, when the spinning jenny was invented at the end of the 18th century, what it did was create a system by which a machine, a technology, was able to spin as much cotton using one person as it would previously take 5. And so what did the 4 people out of work do? They tried to break the cotton. They tried to break the spinning jenny because they saw this new technology as a threat to not only their livelihoods, but as an existential threat. Like, what am I going to do if I can't spin cotton? And I think what some of these regulations are trying to do is look at that moment. Anytime that we have a new technology that makes it easier to do something, there is going to be displacement. So I think part of what these regulations are trying to do is to stop people breaking computers or not using computers or seeing mass polarization as we're already seeing it because people feel economic stress, while at the same time looking at these new challenges. So the cotton ginny, for example, wasn't following you around the internet, seeing what you buy, and then giving it back to you, which is why privacy...
It wasn't smart.
Right.
No, I'm kidding.
I mean, it was kind of smart. Yeah, it was kind of smart. But which is what happens with at least social media-based AI systems. So that's another thing that is worrying. The cotton ginny also wasn't changing public discourse. So my research, for example, looks at communication systems and the ways in which AI systems, in their own right, have lives of their own and can take you on these miraculous journeys to, in some cases, unfortunately, extremism and radicalization. That wasn't necessarily happening before. So with these new regulations, we're thinking about a suite of tools or technologies which in themselves have so many outsized impacts that we've just never seen. However, we have been here before, because I've just told you about the cotton ginny. We have been able to, as citizens, do what happened with Sidewalk Labs, because what came out of that were unions. Another thing that came out of that was child labor stopping, because we also had children working in these fields. And another thing that came out of that was really the beginning of women going into work. So we're in this really nice kind of historical moment that if we can just step back a little bit and look at some of the ways in which we can adapt our society to be more humanistic, if we don't get kind of, I almost think about, so many people are glamored by technology. And I'm like, yo, I've worked in this field for 15 years. I know the people that design these things. They are not smart. So why you're glamored by this, I don't know. And in many cases, they don't work.
Let the record show, yo. Maybe I could just tell you about a recent time that I really wanted to break a machine.
Okay.
Just sort of get it out for a moment. This week, many people may have received their Spotify Wrapped. When I was in Ottawa, incidentally, at a coffee shop very close to Parliament, around the corner from the Prime Minister's office, my coffee was actually free because Spotify was sponsoring it. And I thought, that's really interesting. I didn't want to break the machine then. But synthetic audio, it's here. You said, you're going to talk, storytelling, make it tangible. What's here? What are we dealing with? What are we dealing with now that we weren't when we first released the Digital Charter in Canada? Synthetic audio, it is impossible for the average person, for anyone who's not, a robot, to know that the sounds you're hearing, be they in an elevator or at the dentist or in your headphones, are computational, right? Are made by a machine. We've seen bands, we've seen new artists, on platforms trained by musicians. How and what can we do about those instances where we don't know, we can't see the machine that is displacing maybe an artist that we love, or just kind of in our everyday lives? How do we deal with that invisibility, and also how convenient is it for the applications of that tech?
So there are kind of two things in that question. One of the things that's happening, certainly across social media, are all of these labeling protocols. So across social media, globally, there is an agreement that we should be able to, we should have, the duty of care is to label when you are confronted with something that's artificial, whether it's in the background of a social media post, or whether it is an actual artificial person.
So what is that, like a stamp? Is it like a digital code? Is it like, invisible ink? What does
It's
it
a number
mean?
of things. So
Okay.
it's watermarking, so
Okay.
that if something, if you have an AI-generated piece of content that is originating on Facebook and then it's somehow shared to TikTok,
Yeah.
as it travels cross-platform, there is a digital watermark. So as it goes onto the new platform, they can enforce whatever label. They tend to be the smallest labels you've ever seen, and so I don't know how much. I don't know how much notice they are, because the duty of care is really to keep you on the platform, not to increase your criticality. Let's be fair. But one of the things that was really interesting, so I was in Palo Alto recently at a vinyl shop. There was an event at a vinyl shop, because the big thing in Palo Alto is to have physical music.
Cool.
Because physical music also has instruments. And I was at this party and we were listening to Dr. Pepper, Beatles record, and the whole conversation was like, oh my God, I think Paul McCartney is like strumming an actual instrument. And we were so excited, because what happens with AI-generated art is that there is a flattening effect. So if you look at, there are these great academic papers being written currently where they're looking at, for example, Sora, which is a visual platform. Everything looks like The Lion King. So I'd put in this prompt and I was like, can you please show me a picture of Legos? Legos looks like New York. And it was like, there was like a fake lion in there. It looked like there were planes. And I was like, no, Legos and looks like New York. And the reason that is this Disneyfication, that's the academic term, of these images, is that the systems themselves don't have enough data to differentiate. So when I think about artificial music, it's all gonna be Drake. Like, I'm in his hometown, right? Like, it's all gonna be some version, like the R&B stuff is all gonna be some version of Drake, and depending on where you sit on the Drake and the Kendrick of the situation, that might not be a good thing.
He has had 87 top 10 hits in his career.
Okay,
Drake
but they're not
specifically.
like us, so we'll keep going.
Okay. The Disneyfication is interesting. I mean, also just on Canada and regulation, last week we updated our CanCon rules, which is like always like an undercurrent in the Canadian conversation, right? What is, an interesting composition question and an important one. And we did say something important when it comes to AI, but we didn't quite go far enough. We said AI doesn't count as CanCon. It doesn't count. Now, if you have a human director who uses AI, I don't understand how the rules are going to interpret that. Put that aside. What we didn't say is, what is synthetic material? How do we categorize this? How do we want to think about this? Because you kicked off by reminding us of the power of people.
Yeah.
And another way to frame that is also more crude, of markets.
Yeah.
And I think we are sometimes seeing that the market does not want certain applications of this technology. It doesn't mean it's a rejection writ large of AI and algorithmic systems. Optimizing a supply chain, helping me get on that library wait list, that's great, applications. How can and should we start to think about this material? What are some of the processes, democratic and otherwise, beyond labeling, so that we can get through this moment of noise and uncertainty and the Disneyfication?
I think synthetic material is one point, but when we're doing consultations, we always ask people to think about risk, right? So what is the risk of seeing a Disneyfied image of Legos versus what is the risk of the voice of, and this happened in the US election in 2024, where Joe Biden's voice was
That's
changed. Right. And he was heard to have been saying something that he didn't. Or more importantly, the Romanian election, which actually ended up being recalled because of synthetic material on TikTok. And I think depending on where risk lies is where the rules should go in. But most people who are coming out to listen to the two of us speak on Friday night are not thinking about those things. Most people are thinking about, am I going to have a job after this? And if I don't have a job after this because some algorithm has taken it, how do I get a new job when I know that human beings are no longer reading resumes? I think about and I'm dating myself, but I think about the first job I ever got when I was 16 is because I walked into a store that sells jeans and said to the person, can I have a job? And the person said, yeah. And I worked there throughout college. So I ended up working there for like 8 years. And in those 8 years, I did not have any sales target because there was no system to say what I sold or what I didn't sell. In those 8 years, there were no such things as iPads to check me out. I went to some store, I got in last night, and I went to some store today, and I couldn't figure out how to check out on the iPads. I just left the and they were like, no, ma'am, come back. And I was like, oh, no, I only work with humans. I don't know.
Good.
I don't know. I'm not unionized. I don't know what this is. I am not an employee of yours, so I'll just mind my own business and try and find a human to buy something from. And that comes from having been a retail worker. And I'm thinking, and so to me, rather than thinking about synthetic media, it's labor that really animates me. It's thinking about ways in which, how do we get the truth? If I'm looking for, I was speaking to somebody earlier, and she brought up this really interesting point about news aggregators and not being able to share news on social media. So you get this kind of, the AI thinks, this happened, and I was like, back away from that immediately because the AI can't think. And so I think in policy making, I would be somebody that is advocating for what people actually need. Yes, I do need an AI system to get me up on the waiting list at the library or to make my bus come quicker, or the Nobel Prize in Chemistry last year went to 3 engineers actually at DeepMind, but their project was looking at the ways in which you can use AI hallucination to create new potential protein helixes. Now, the prize was given for something in lab conditions, so it hasn't been tested. We don't know whether this can be marketed, but my instinct is that that's such a good application of using an AI system, but the problem is it was a private company. And so that then puts it behind who gets access to this, who doesn't get access to this. Should we be having laws around open sourcing our most valuable discoveries in AI if they are for human good, if they're for the public good? That's more where I think I'm interested.
Let's go there, and maybe we can talk about institutions of higher education, because I'll say they're a bridge between youth and the labor force. Canada is in a productivity crisis. We've heard from the Bank of Canada, we got to break the glass, and we're also pushing our firms here to adopt productivity enhancing technology, something we're also historically bad at. The list is surprisingly long. The real risk that we will see this kind of moment where firms may choose algorithmic applications or software systems in favor of taking on the joy and responsibility of training a young person and giving them those early opportunities. And yet at the same time, we see that when it comes to tech policy, we've been much more willing to be restrictive when it comes to children. No phones in schools, and the Toronto District School Board, and talking about, you know, the right ages to start. And then we sort of have this middle ground where we see ChatGPT use plummet once the term is done, elements like this. How are we going to position and moderate what is probably less of a thinking machine and more of a cheating machine that also cheats us of that intellectual labor of reading, thinking, writing, while also recognizing that it's a tool that many are using at work and can be and might be an enhancement? What the heck are we going to do?
Oh my goodness. So I currently teach at Cambridge University in the UK, and one of the things that's really interesting about that cohort of students that I teach, and I teach in a course that looks at social impacts of AI. So these are the undergraduates that are going to go into the global workforce, having had access to some of the most advanced labs in the global higher education landscape. And it's still amazing to me that I will get an essay that does not even remotely reflect the brilliance of these students that I have the honor of teaching, and has dashes in. And has strange italics in, and has strange words like "with not standing." And
delve into the Oxford comma.
And not that I mean, I enjoy a "with not standing," and it's just that so the particular course I'm speaking about, and this is a Cambridge thing. This is not like it's Hogwarts, so it's not normal people when I tell you the name of this course, but it's digital intimacies, which basically means dating apps, but because it's Hogwarts, we have to call it something. And so
smart dating.
I'm reading an essay, and it will say something like, but you know, algorithmic mediation of desire with not standing. And I'm like, you're writing about Tinder. Like, stop this immediately. And I'm having to have these really critical conversations with my students and pointing out to them how because they're trusting these AI applications so much, it's actually changing their ideas. And students that are identifying themselves as either being feminist in their orientation or thinking about masculinities, which is, we don't speak about it as much in public life, but the study of masculinities is basically the study often of good men. And we don't really speak about good men that much in public life. And so they have these really interesting ideas, but because the data set is so limited, ideas about women often delve into violence and delve into these very negative frames. And ideas about young men often are extremely problematic and towards speaking about stuff like toxic masculinity. And that's really not the course that I'm teaching, and it's really not what they mean to say. And I've had to, with their permission, actually record lectures and conversations and then play them back, and then looking at the with not standing essay and saying why these two things are very different. And maybe the way that they should be thinking about using an AI system is for very remedial tasks, because there was a paper, very famous paper by Appel Labs, which is their AI research lab, that came out this June, that said that the AI systems that we have right now are not able to engage in what we call multi-step processing. And that just means having one or two thoughts at the same time. So having a thought about a woman that is also kind, having a thought about a man that is also compassionate. Those are not things that are programmed in. And this is what I'm seeing reflected. And I can imagine for university level teachers that they're having these same frustrations. And then you're doing another thing. You're often handing somebody the first failing grade that they've ever seen in their lives. And it's one thing to fail at university in a random course called Digital Intimacies, when it really could be just called about it could be called Don't Use Tinder, because that's basically what it is. Bumble, Tinder, Hinge, don't. And it worries me about the workforce. Because if everybody has cut and pasted their way through university life, then we don't really have a nation of thinkers. And coming from the United States, we are suffering because we don't really have a thinker at the top of our political life.
Well, I mean, for us in the sovereignty conversation that we're also locked into, it is, I think, a question worth asking in terms of, is our boogeyman or boogie person really just Trump or the Trump administration, or are we really up against the intentional subjugation by the Magnificent Seven, right? A lot, it's kind of the same conversation, and perversely for Canada in this moment, it feels like we don't want to dare put new regulations in the window that would be seen to be taking on big tech because of the retaliatory risks. And I say ironic because what better time for Canada to stand up for the economy that we want and have more AI for the people, or a different approach in Canada than anywhere else. I might ask you a couple of the questions that we did discuss in our pre-call. So far, I've hit on none of them. You could call it a hallucination. I actually want to know, why shouldn't you use Tinder, asking for a friend, but in case anyone in the audience, you were just don't use it. And so do you think that's a flattening of the dating experience, or that people won't actually speak to each other at a bar or at a library event on a Friday night, that they prefer to meet on an app, or what's just very quickly, I feel like you left us hanging there.
Okay, so I definitely would approach people at a library event on a Friday night, because they probably like books. And if you like books like I like books, that would be one thing. But it really goes back to the core of the work of AI for the people. And there's really good research that what happens within dating apps is that they optimize for what we think is desirable. And often the ideas of desirability are so limited and so narrow that there was a study out recently, and if you were a black woman, and I hate when I say this, it's just because I don't have better language, but an Asian man, which is basically the whole world, because if you look at the people that are characterized as Asian, it's all of them over there, and it's no, we need to be more precise in our definitions. You're not likely to be recommended in the algorithm. So assuming that you are going online to actually meet somebody, if you have this algorithmic actor that has been programmed to say these particular people with these types of features are not desirable, then you're not actually that mediation isn't going to get you to your desired outcome. And it forces people who are 5'8" to say that they are 6 feet. It forces people who are 300 pounds to say that they're 150 pounds, because they may be liars, and I direct you to Netflix for their Tinder swindler, version 20. It feels like there's so many of those Netflix documentaries and in other places. But it also creates this situation that to beat the algorithm, you cannot be honest. And at the basis of people creating romantic connection, there has to be honesty and there has to be trust.
So can we make a more equitable algorithmic system for dating apps or elsewhere? How do we start to build that? Because I love that you're bringing up this kind of pseudo optimization of desire.
Right.
And these computational questions are people really attracted to similarity or to complementarity? And
Right.
should you listen to what people proclaim in a dating app they're interested in, or should you try to infer it from all these other things? There's a universe where that's like a very interesting scientific question, and there's also just a universe where it's unrealistic. So how do we start thinking about building better systems? Where is this happening? How can Canada do it?
So it's happening in open source communities. I live in New York City part-time, and
So cool. I live in New York City part-time.
yeah, part-time. Even though after January it might be more, because we have a new mayor coming, I'm very excited about.
Also very cool, actually. Yeah.
Very excited about. And what's happening in these open source communities is that they're thinking about how can we create systems that make it easier for elderly people to have access to services or emergency services without their privacy being compromised? Or how can we think about systems that match, to use a library, kind of this population that doesn't have access to books or to knowledge resources with communities that do. The issue is that there is no business case for those types of technologies. So they're often supported by philanthropic priorities can change, and so it's difficult for consistency. And then it's just those are often passion projects.
Yeah.
Because there is no market to support them, even though I would argue, if we look at like OpenAI's Q3 earnings in the United States, they lost between $11.5 billion to $12 billion.
Give or take a few billion.
Right. But the reason that there is a business case, I always laugh that these large language models are like technologies chasing after a business case. And honestly, the mass writing of email apparently isn't doing it. And so we have to think about other ways of using them. And what I would love to see is more government support for what are public sector applications, so increasing social service designations. There is no reason that should be built on top of an existing architecture, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to go to Microsoft or Google to build something on top of it. Maybe what we could do is develop a whole class of work where you have public sector engineers that are doing this work, and those systems are meant for people, and that takes out the profit motive. So that's one potential fix. And then the other fix is doing some of what we've seen in Australia, for example, where they charge social media companies for decimating their news systems. So there are these other taxes and levies that to operate in their country that they have to pay that are protective to things like journalism, because that is part of how you maintain a democracy, is that you have the right to hold your lawmakers accountable.
Yeah, or the ability. I mean, I mentioned sovereignty earlier, and one of my very intelligent girlfriends for quite a while was pronouncing the word sovereignty, which I loved. I was like, yes, sovereignty now. We all need it. But it was a reminder that it's actually a word that is like hot right now and like sort of sexy, but also dangerously vague. But that's what it means, the ability to actually govern your own economy, right? Do you actually have it or not? And for Canada, increasingly with large technology companies, we don't. We have sovereignty on paper, but not in practice. A lot of that is tied up, or some of that is tied up in our trade agreement. I use the word agreement loosely, you know why. But again, that's all part of why you can be optimistic, I think, about right now. I think it is an intriguing time for Canada to stand up and articulate what are the markets we want? How do we want this tech to be used?
And also your strategic positioning with Europe, I think, makes you so powerful, because one of the things that the EU has been able to do, for example, is put the gauntlet down and say that we want privacy. I'm like, I have particular feelings about the word Commonwealth, because I didn't feel that the wealth was very common, but
Smart wealth.
So yeah, so I think that we need to all wonder where our piece of the wealth went, but I guess we could ask the prince formerly known as Andrew, I don't know. But, you know, but you have all of these links to Europe that I think create the political cover that's needed to go up against the Magnificent Seven. I mean, I'm an individual, and there's a whole class of us where we don't have institutional power, but we're still using our voices, because if we're gonna live, why not live well? And if I'm gonna fight with anybody, why not Silicon Valley? I mean,
I'm so glad that's on camera. I mean, Magnificent Seven, that's also a word where it's like, magnificent, I do not think you're using that word the way it's supposed to be used. You mentioned privacy legislation coming to Canada. May I ask you about another trend that makes me want to break machines in privacy, which is increasingly we are seeing carve-outs for algorithmic training. So we have this situation, I'll explain it. We have this situation where for a lot of digital systems, the price of participation is now not just our privacy, but that all our information will be used to create proprietary algorithmic systems that are sold access to. So Microsoft, LinkedIn just did this to us here in Canada. It was a little bit late, but it's like, okay, if you keep using, we're opting you in, if you keep using LinkedIn, everything that's here can be used for our system. We don't really have a choice. It's kind of like a coercive consent situation. But how does it come to be that we're allowing companies to just take more and more and more from us? Like, isn't it ironic to see that in like new privacy legislation that says for businesses, you can take as much and any information that you want if you're using it for AI?
I mean, I'm kind of famous for wanting to live on an island by myself behind a tree.
Yeah, it's like Grinch, right? Like, I don't blame him for living in the mountain.
Yeah, because, I mean, just to kind of translate that into Friday night speak, what they're saying is that you can have privacy unless you're using a platform, and then the platform can take.
Or, you know, if you turn off these features, like your experience on LinkedIn is really going to depreciate. Right?
I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, just get off LinkedIn. Like, I don't
that
know.
would solve a lot of my problems, honestly.
I don't.
No, but is it the right exchange, right? Like, is that a valid exchange?
No.
And yeah.
I think privacy should be privacy, and I think that if that's what you're offering people, and algorithmic training for what? Because many of these systems famously don't work as desired, and so maybe they just don't work. Maybe it's time
with
to move
you
on.
there. Speaking of moving on, we will turn to the audience soon for a few questions. So I'm sure there are many that are already ready. You mentioned public institutions, open source, this opportunity for governments to really build in the public interest, which gets us more towards the markets and the systems that we want. How can we think of the role of libraries in supporting not just conversation, but sort of other modeling or mirroring that we're hoping for?
I think, libraries play this amazing role, because people that work within, librarians have a duty of care to give accurate information. And that has become so valuable in this AI world, simply because most of the AI systems that we interact with are optimized to please us. They're optimized to encourage us to stay on platforms. And so they're willing, kind of like in the dating app analogy that I gave, they are willing to present partial truths or no truths whatsoever. And that actually is extremely bad for democracy. So I was really, earlier this evening, I had the opportunity to speak to some of the members of the Toronto Public Library Foundation, and I was so pleased to hear that one of the pillars that they that they support is democracy, and underneath democracy was this idea of how AI systems can kind of amplify mis and disinformation, and it was the role of the library to help people think critically by making all information available. So I think that public trust and information role is really important. I also think exposure to tools. So I was like the Google.org, where people can come in and use. I think it's really important for people to understand what AI systems can do, specifically large language models, and not do. My students were really, really fascinated to find out that what they were saying to me in class was not what was being written by the system. And the thing that I left with them was, you have actual intelligence. This isn't even artificially intelligent. And you are using it in the wrong ways. And then we were thinking about some more use cases. That's a similar role to what I think libraries could potentially play. And then the other place that I think libraries are really important, and I take this from the conversations around Sidewalk Labs, was the ability to convene groups of people that wouldn't ordinarily come together. And I think that there is so much value in sitting with people who don't look like you, don't have the same experiences that you do, that was the first time I've lived. Is today December 5th?
Yes.
So this is my 20th anniversary in the United States and Canada.
Wow.
Which is really...
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Which is really fitting in some odd way that is... I like that. But thank you for spending it with me. I appreciate you. But when I came to do an event here, and then I came back for a consultation, and it was really the first time that I had sat with people who are the original peoples of the land, right? And it was the first time since I'd come to the Americas that I had listened to why the land that was going to be built on was so important to these particular groups of people. And I'd heard about kind of land stewardship and land sovereignty. That only happened because I was in the library. I would never have had that opportunity. And I think it's that clashing of people together that becomes really important, because when it comes to questions about AI, and I go all over the world doing events like this, nobody cares about some complicated privacy policy. Everybody cares about, is my job going to be taken? Everybody cares about, is my kid going to be educated? Everybody cares about, is my fridge spying on me? And unfortunately, if you have a smart fridge, probably. But, you know, what I always say to that one is that Mark Zuckerberg very famously covers the camera on his laptop. So if you have a laptop, I would cover yours too, because of privacy concerns. And I think the more libraries have the ability to break these systems down. And then the last thing, the reason I'm doing a PhD and work that I've spent most of my professional life doing is because I have to upskill. And the reason I have to upskill, despite having designed systems, looked at social impacts, done policy work, is that the market's changing. And so because the market's changing, I have to be a step ahead of that market change. And I think what libraries can really do is have those strategic conversations about where do we think the market is going to go, and how can we get people to upskill to make sure that you're always ahead of the change in the market rather than running after the technology. And that's because the only future that is certain is the one that we create.
For now, I personally do know how many bees there are in blueberries, so I'm feeling pretty good, but that could change in the future. Please join me in thanking Mutale. We're going to turn it to you.